McQuestion, for over 28 years talking about things that matter with people who care. Production of McQuestion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, the University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future.
Well, welcome to the program. Obviously, I'm Dennis McQuestion. I'm sitting here with my co-host, Jim Falk. Jim, nice to see you.
Good to be here, and it certainly is a timely, interesting topic.
It is. Whistleblowing. It follows up a program we did earlier in the year on something called fraud. So let's see what we're going to be talking about on whistleblowing. You know, whistleblower, in case you don't know, is someone who exposes fraud or ethical wrongdoing in organizations, usually after trying to fix the problem in the organization first. They put their careers in jeopardy by doing so. On a prior program, we looked at why people commit fraud and ways to prevent it. Today, we'll examine how frauds are exposed and the risk that whistleblowers take in the process. Now, joining us from Italy is journalist Tom Muller, who wrote this book, Crisis of Conscience, Whistleblowing in an Age of Fraud. Tom, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Dennis. Good to be here.
Mary Ann Jennings joins us here in the studio. Mary Ann is Professor Emeritus of Legal and Ethical Studies at Arizona State University and the author of a little book called The 7 Signs of Ethical Collapse, as I recall. And Mary Ann, you were on that other program on fraud as well. Can you give that viewer just a brief summary of what we talked about so we'll bring them up to speed?
Well, we focused a lot on organizations where you have gigantic accounting frauds, you have frauds related to research data and pharmaceuticals, you have frauds related to products and what they do and what they don't do. And what happens is people in organizations sort of get this psychological factor going where it feels like you're doing your job, even though you're looking at it and saying, oh, doesn't feel right. And so you have this organizational culture that influences the decisions people make, along with the fact that there's compensation, there's rewards, there are promotions that go with it. And so these decisions just sort of spiral out of control until you have a headline and then it's managed. And usually there's a whistleblower at the level of too much fraud. We've gone too far now. And so it begins very small with the misrepresentations, the accounting treatments, those kinds of things, and continues to grow until the headline.
Tom, it's good to see you again. Thank you for joining us. And I can imagine why it took you 7 years to write your book, because whistleblowing is not a new topic. It really goes back to the origins of our country, doesn't it?
It certainly does, and I'm always amazed when people talk about whistleblowers as snitches or traitors or unpatriotic in certain cases. I mean, one of the very first whistleblower laws was passed by the Continental Congress in 1778 when 10 military whistleblowers from the U.S. Navy came and reported their supreme commander, the Commodore of the U.S. Navy, for dereliction of duty and abuse of British prisoners. And not only did the Congress not jail them or call them traitors, they passed a law stating it was the right and duty of all citizens of the Republic to report wrongdoing by public officials. And they even paid their legal fees and made sure they had the documents to prove their wrongdoing by the Commodore. So that's a very early example of government whistleblowing. And then we have corporate whistleblowing. None other than Abraham Lincoln in 1863 during the height of the Civil War, when he discovered, horror of horrors, that defense contractors were robbing the Union Army blind. He helped to pass a law, the Lincoln Law, or the False Claims Act, that allowed individual citizens to become private attorneys general and prosecute fraud on behalf of all of their fellow citizens. One of the most powerful forcing mechanisms that we have, and certainly one of the most powerful tools against fraud that the Department of Justice has today. Those two paradigm whistleblower laws were passed by some of the most respected presidents and figures in American history.
Now, why at times do people tend to think that a whistleblower is a traitor or someone that has really not represented the company appropriately?
Well, when we get into groups, and particularly highly charged groups with a mission and a visionary leader, We tend to see the world in a real tunnel vision. We tend to see us and them. We are wired to see in groups and out groups. This goes back millions of years of our evolutionary history. We have been wired to be good to our internal team and tough, if not lethal, to outsiders. Now, when someone within the group, no matter how bad the group is behaving, even a mafia turncoat, when someone turns against their own members, everyone, besides the whistleblower, typically has the same reaction. You are a traitor. You have been freeloading and taking advantage of all the things that we've been doing, all the things that we've been creating, and now you're turning on us. Quite often people lose sight, as Marianne has pointed out. The slippery slope allows you to lose sight of just how bad your behavior has become. And when someone calls it out, you get outraged. And at the same time, your conscience gets a little bit of an ice pick because they're telling you what you sort of know, but prefer not to think about. And that is your bonus and your career and your stellar performance is based on fraudulent behavior.
Yeah, it's interesting, Tom, that your book is Whistleblowing in an Age of Fraud. And here are three women who were wonderful whistleblowers dating back to 2002, 2003, Marianne. And that's back in the Enron days when you and I first met. And they blew the whistle, one of them for Enron, one of them for WorldCom, and one of them actually for the FBI. A good thing we don't have any problems there anymore. That's
been solved.
Yeah, that's been solved, of course. But what is it that gets people to the point where they will, I guess, take a chance, expose themselves? Because as I mentioned in the beginning, I think most people try to fix things in-house before they go public. Am I right or wrong about that?
No, I think they do. And I think Tom's book does an excellent job on all of his examples of illustrating these were people who were trying every avenue they knew to solve a problem. And they just could not because the culture had so consumed them. And then I think there's another factor that we kind of have to look at here, and I call it the prisoners of each other factor, that when we start this stuff, however small it is, and I always say with students, should I clock in with for someone who's late getting to work? And they don't want to be ostracized by the culture and say, well, you're a mean person. But at the same time, once you clock in for somebody else, they know something about you, you know something about them, and they never stop with just one time or one request. So in these gigantic frauds that we have going on, there are a lot of people that have a lot of information about others, and so everybody's afraid to move. So that when they raise it internally, it becomes really difficult for anybody to do anything because, well, yeah, but then I'll have to admit that I did this. And so it just sort of gets consumed within that culture. And so from that comes the whistleblower. And this is a person who just can't take it anymore. They're willing to put everything on the line and just risk it because it's just too wrong. They can't cope with it anymore. And I suspect that all along the way they were suffering with this, but it was just that they were caught in an area, you know, that's like Serpico when he was the honest cop and went in and they said, you know, who are you? You're the problem. This is the way we do things here, but frustrated.
Tom, you go into considerable detail about the profile of a whistleblower, and I know stereotypes and generalizations are dangerous, but are there certain personality characteristics that one sees with whistleblowers?
Yes, Jim. I think that, I mean, it may be a factor to a certain extent of which personalities and which stories I was attracted to, but in my 200-odd interviews with whistleblowers, a number of characteristics came out. One, they tend to be pretty black and white about ethics. It's not a gray area. It's not a